Hello, everyone. You are live on Wakwetu TV. Today, we are trying to do something a bit different. You still have our fellow guests, our fellow Wakwetu crew. They will come on at some stage. Today, we'll try and discuss about the economy in terms of the way things are going right now at the moment. We'll be discussing what has happened during the week, or should I just say we might even compromise it for what has happened the past month. And I'd like to also talk to the YouTube people. Today, to be, as I said, it's a bit different. We have those who like giving us super chats, you know, those who like contributing. So today, I'll give you one job as well. I would like you, the time you donate, try to give us a question concerning the subject we are talking about. And then our guest, who's my fellow Wakwetu crew member, he's my guest today. He will explain, because he's an expert as well. He might be part of our group, but he's an expert. He will give you an answer. And same applies with the Facebook viewers as well. When you send us stars, please ask a question concerning the topics we are talking about, and that question will be put to our guest. My name is Percy Chama. They're both my names, so you can call me Chama Percy, Percy Chama. They all go the same. I'm based in the UK. I was born in Mufulira, Kamchanga Hospital. I grew up in Zambia, like the majority of Zambians in diaspora. I went to university here as well. I did chemical engineering with computer science. At the moment, I'll let my I'll talk about I'll introduce my guest a bit, and then he will talk a bit about himself. But what I can tell you, he's Washington-based business and accounting expert. He's actually from Zambia. The mother is from Zambia. He was born in Zambia, in Ndola to be precise, and the father is from Solwezi. And he holds a bachelor degree in accounting in accounting from ACCA Oxford Brookes University UK, and an MBA in accounting from Kasla Graduation School of Management, Illinois, USA. He is a chartered global management accountant from the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, he is a PhD advanced accounting from North Central University in Santiago, California. He has worked as a university professor of accounting and founder and managing principal at Washington, D.C., based from Tyson Corner. So, Dr. Kasonso.
Yes.
I hope I haven't left anything about you. So can you introduce yourself if I've left anything?
Welcome to TV Vakwetu. I'm a regular TV Vakwetu pundit, and thank you so much for those generous compliments. Yes, I have expertise in business, accounting, and finance. I am based in Washington. You've covered pretty much everything that concerns me. And I'm excited to be part of this debut show where we provide answers to difficult things or speak about current issues in business with a focus on the Republic of Zambia and how things in business and economics are being calibrated right now, and what people should expect and what people are going to work on. That is the purpose of this Monday version of TV Bakwetu, is to discuss the current issues in business.
Okay. At some point, we'll bring in, because we've got a lot of experts in terms of this field. At some point, I'll bring in Patrick Chilufya, who is also an accountant. I'll bring him later on after Dr. Kasonso has spoken a bit, so that when he comes to speak, he can also give his own perspective on the issues we'll discuss. Then later on, I'll bring in the Bakwetu crew. So the first thing I'll actually ask you, that's what everyone in Zambia are really struggling with. You find that some are happy with it, there are some at Tualali, Enshi, Shani. So my question is, how would you characterize the impact of the removal of the subsidies on the energy by the New Dawn government?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mr. Chama. You know, yes, it's been a topical issue in the last several months, and many people have actually been caught unawares, and I've heard some pundits even suggest that that part is the initiative of the IMF or something like that. And but the New Dawn government purpose to remove those subsidies with specific goals in mind. So how I would characterize it, from their perspective, it's actually a very bold move because it carries with it lots of political risks. And depending on how they work to explain the issue to the citizens, the issue may actually be very much misunderstood by the people. So we have to go to the business sense of such a decision. And I will characterize it in two ways. The first one has to do with the impact on private household income and then impact on government coffers. So I'll start with the first one, the impact on private household income. In nearly all cases, the removal of such subsidies have a cross-cut effect on the income of all households. What that means is that people in the country will have to pay more for what they need to run a family. Prices of essential commodities, food, transportation, electricity will invariably go up. And I've heard some commentators suggest that the increases of gas at the pump only affects the rich people in Lusaka or people who have cars. And that is not the case. The increase in fuel prices leads to increases in prices on nearly every product in all supply chains. So it is going to be felt in terms of the incomes in the households. What that means is that families will have disposable income of the families will be affected. And once that family income is affected, it means that families will have reduced income. Now, the new Dawn government was aware that this was going to be the impact of the removal of such subsidies. So now what happens when you know that the subsidies are going to have an impact on family income, you have to have mitigations or what we call interventions. So to mitigate against such accompanying policies, you will have to have other public policy interventions. So since they knew that this is what will happen in the onset, you can actually look squarely into their budget and you see that there is a cluster of interventions. For example, households will not have to spend money on the highest block of school-going children. That is a form of an intervention to mitigate for reduced disposable income due to increases in energy costs, consumption of energy costs. Another intervention that you can also look at is also the direct investments in households through CDF, which is a form of a grant to invest in job creating activities for those unemployed within the constituencies. So you see that the increases in the prices of gas and electricity is going to have a negative effect on private household income. So what do you do about that? What you do is you introduce other interventions outside of that, if you find it necessary to cut the subsidies. But here's the big point. The main thing of doing those kind of subsidies is to increase substantially government revenues, and thus expanding on transfers and government consumption increases. So the new government is lowering debt and increasing government revenues. And this gives government capacity to do not only pay off the heavy debt that they have inherited, they also are able to have resources to boost the economy in different sectors. So therefore, the removal of subsidies on fuel by the government is a cryptic message to the nation to work a little harder, to raise their game, which in the end grows the economy and improves the welfare of citizens. So the general characterization that I could have on the removal of subsidies is the government is sending a message that we as a country have to work a little harder. But the government has encrypted into the program interventions, and those interventions should be looked around for and be found within the resources of the country. So that is how I would characterize these subsidies. Yeah.
No, I understand. Before I ask the next question, I remember you did mention that the CDF and the paying of school fees and things like that will reduce the, it will help the families in terms of expenditure for the house, or should I say the household budget, or so in terms of of that, So what other benefits, apart from just those two things you've mentioned, what other things do you think it is helping?
What the government, what is happening here is that the government is trying to restructure the flow of money in and out of the country, and it's also at the same time trying to manage the flow of money in and out of households, and from there create a strategy to expand the economy. Let me give you an example. If, for example, we left the subsidies in place, every time when market imperfections exist, like there are in Zambia, it is the right of the government to use subsidies to relieve those that are ill-advantaged. In a low monetized economy like ours, subsidies can achieve more efficient social policies. It may be easier to slash food prices to consumers than to make social transfers to people. So government can use a subsidy like that. So the subsidy on fuel is really one of those kinds, but we've had those subsidies in place for a long time. So we have to look at the downside of those subsidies. We have to ask ourselves, have these subsidies created the substantive economic growth that we desired? Have these subsidies really benefited the people? Are there other benefits that we're not giving to the people that we can give if we remove the subsidies? Keeping the subsidies, Mr. Chairman, in place does three things. Number one, it perpetuates the corruption in the fuel supply chain. We've been informed in the recent past that there are certain deals that don't make sense financially within the supply chain of the fuel. So if we keep the subsidies in place, we are perpetuating that corruption in that supply chain. Number two, we would be squandering opportunities to pay down the debt. We are a highly indebted country, and most of that debt was invested in things that don't directly generate money for Zambia. So what it means is that Zambia has to find creative ways to generate revenue to cover debt for those things that were borrowed for. So if we keep the subsidies, it means we squander the opportunities to pay down the debt. Number three, it continues financing consumption with borrowed money. And that is not something we can do. We have a heavy debt of more than $14 billion. And we can't do subsidies of this sort because we will continue funding consumption with borrowed money. We borrow money and then we spend it on consumption, consumables such as fuel and energy. In a country that owes well over $14 billion and spent on construction and stuff that are not currently generating money for the benefit of the country, continuing with such subsidies is neither wise nor sustainable in both the short term and the long term. So what we have to do is to understand that this removal of subsidies is actually an opportunity for us to invest in other things, for us to save some money, and for us to be able to have resources for interventions. Remember, we are still in the COVID pandemic, and we don't have all the resources that are required for our people to be get vaccinations, have adequate medicines. So government needs money and needs revenue for that. So the benefit of having to remove those is it's an invitation for us as a population to work harder, but it is also the opportunity for us to pay down the debt and participate in paying down the debt. At the same time, working a little harder to expand the economy and grow opportunities and taking advantage of the opportunities that the government is giving in return.
While we are on the same topic, in terms of your last answer, I could hear that there were some long-term benefits. So can I just ask it direct? What are the long-term effects? Sorry, not benefits. What are the long-term effects of keeping subsidies in place? Okay, let's say if let's say the way those guys who are busy saying no, keep them, you've heard, we are all reading. There are some people who are saying, no, you should keep those. So what do you think? What would have been the long-term effect on our economy with that type of thinking? If I kept those, I know you've mentioned a few, but I would just like you to elaborate a bit.
Yeah, so if we would keep the subsidies in place, then we are not using the resources available in those subsidies to grow the economy. Two, we are continuing to live off of debt. That's what it means. So stopping those subsidies is inviting us to, through the price of gas and the subsequent increases on commodities, it's inviting us to kind of restructure our lives. The government is just money spent on something being spent elsewhere. That money is available within the economy. So keeping subsidies in place squanders the opportunity to use creative solutions to resolve economic problems for the country.
That's quite interesting. Okay, as we are reaching, I would say, half of our discussion, I'll divert a bit, but before I go ahead, before I just zoom out from what we are talking about, we've covered about subsidies, but we also want to talk about corruption as well. You know that in these issues, you have corrupt leaders, corrupt deals. So basically, what I want to do now is I'll play you an audio, and that audio, Dr. Kasonso won't answer that immediately. He will explain. After that video, I'll ask a question on top of that. Then Dr. Kasonso will explain a few things, and then he will also touch on the same audio I'll play. The audio I'll play is from one of these parliamentary committees. They were talking to the Director of Agriculture, if I'm not mistaken. He was being asked about the contracts, the way they were allocating contracts. So which wasn't a very good way, and to be honest, it had a lot to be desired. For now, I'll let you listen to the audio, and then I'll ask a question, and then I'll let my doc, who's here, to answer. But for now, listen to the audio. Sorry about that.
That process and that single sourcing. You can proceed.
Thank you, Chair. The documents that I've brought, first of all, I need to explain how I came into possession of these documents. I think after the queries that were coming up on regarding the debt swap, I did engage the Office of the Permanent Secretary, the secretaries themselves, to try and retrieve some documentation regarding these transactions. So what I've brought, I made photocopies. It's basically some communication between the Ministry of Agriculture and the PPA, I think which started sometime earlier 2016. And also between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Finance, where the authority was given to the ministry to single source Rockcliffe company. I submit here, those are the documents that I handed over to the PS.
So, Mr. Mwale, the coordinator for FISIP, these documents came from the Minister of Finance. Is that what's submitting before this House? You can proceed.
The documents I brought are from Ministry of Agriculture, but there is an authority letter allowing the ministry to single source Rockcliffe from Ministry of Finance.
Yes, honorable members, we can.
Okay, I'll just leave it on there. You can hear that they are talking about single sourcing things, whereby, you know. So my question is, what are the impacts of corruption in business?
Thank you so much for that question.
If we can talk about that.
Yeah, so when you look at what is going on in that audio, they have isolated an issue of single sourcing. Basically, when you talk about single sourcing, it is where you don't make other bidders available to bid for a product or a service that you require. So it means that the bid that you have put up or the contract you have signed has been just predetermined by other people behind the scenes. And usually, those are the ones that are susceptible to corruption. We are told that in sourcing fuel to the Republic of Zambia as well, there are those elements. So now, the impact of corruption on doing business is various. First of all, it reduces foreign direct and domestic investments. It reduces foreign direct and domestic investments. Why? Because it reduces the confidence of the investors. People don't know whether they'll get their money's worth or they'll get a correct rate of return on their investments. So that is the first problem. The second one, corruption increases inequality and poverty. Why does it do that? Is because the way contracts are awarded or the way works for services are distributed to people, there is no open bidding process where the fairest deal wins, or people who have the best offer are the ones who are brought to the front. Then the other problem is it raises the number of freeloaders in the economy. Corruption makes life good for just a small group of people, and the majority of the people are not having access to things that are really needed for them to thrive. And then, like we heard in the story, it's actually the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament a day before Christmas that was querying over those issues. Corruption distorts and exploits public investments. You know, the government can invest into some works, but you'll find that there are other payments that are made to cut that deal. And in the end, the product or service is at a price that includes those type of costs. So in other words, it distorts and exploits public investments. And finally, it reduces public revenue. The government doesn't get much out of those deals. Most of the money goes into the pockets of the other people. If we talk, for example, in the fuel sector, you find that the government is paying subsidies, but those subsidies are in part going to private players only in that supply chain who are part of the supplying of the fuel. So corruption reduces public revenues. In other words, it continues to make the government broke at the expense of those, and government broke and at the expense of those dealers found in those private contracts. So that is a principal problem there.
Doc, what are the specific ways, or what specific way does corruption increase the cost of doing business, especially in our country, Zambia? You know, what do you think in terms of that?
In Zambia, let's look at the cost structure of inputs. If you are buying fuel whose costs have been inflated, it means that your inputs, the cost of materials, the cost of production is going to be higher, and that would have been distorted because of corruption. So the outputs also, because when you have an output, you have to do cost plus. The cost plus means that you put a price at such a level that you include all your expenses, and then you add a little profit on top of that. So both inputs and outputs are distorted in the production process. Even if you just produce goods, even if you just a farmer, the cost of imports is going to be higher because corruption costs have been included as part of that. So even the palm fuel price is going to be higher because the corruption costs are included in that one. So if you take out the corruption specifically from that, you are going to have a cost structure that is sustainable, and the outputs will be appropriately priced. And it is also reduces, in Zambia, it reduces business confidence, which complicates opportunities. When people want to do joint ventures with Zambian businessmen, they don't have confidence in them because they know they don't have confidence in the sense that those people are bringing the correct numbers to the table to work with. And finally, it reduces access to low-cost capital, which will end, in that case, you will end up borrowing from subprime lenders at higher rates, if not exorbitant rates. So what we're trying to say here is that because of corruption, you are not going to run businesses that are going to be respected in the global economy. It will complicate your access to low-cost capital that you could afford and make a product and make a profit in the global economy. So those are the specific areas in which we have to root out contract racketeering and contract corruption specifically in those areas.
Well, that's quite interesting. Because now we will discuss about the corruption in the fuel supply chain, the Public Account Committee. As we start discussing this, I'll bring in Patrick, because you are all in the same line of job. So at least because this bit we are trying to discuss, it will be more like a summary of what we've discussed or what Dr. Kasonso has explained. So before Dr. Kasonso puts more meat to our bone, I'll bring in Patrick to give us a little bit of what he heard, and then I'll go back to Dr. Kasonso. Yes, Patrick. Mrishan. Muripa mute.
Good evening, Percy. Good evening, Kasonso.
I'm fine, Patrick.
Yeah. Ati muzungu wa vula kejo kumusebenzela ne.
Yes.
Yeah. So how are you, Mr. Kasonso? Good to see you.
I'm fine, sir. How are you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would love to say Merry Christmas to our audience in Zambia and in the diaspora. Yeah, but Percy, I think we're talking about a very important topic, and my brother Kasonso has articulated, has explained most of the issues very well, and most of the things Kasonso said were true. And when you look at the subsidies, Kasonso will agree with me. Every economy, even in the Western world, they do give subsidies. They do provide subsidies. But the question is, can you afford them? Because a lot of economies can afford subsidies. Can Zambia afford subsidies? That's a situation where, Zambia found itself. At this moment, Zambia cannot afford subsidies. If we didn't have the debt, the huge debt, which is about $14 billion, maybe Zambia would have afforded the subsidies. But again, Kasonso explained that when you look at when the government explained the supply chain, say, of fuel, we discover that the cost, looking at the cost structure of fuel, the pump fuel, most of those costs are inflated. And not only that, there is also a corrupt element there, which is an opportunity cost.
Yes.
And Kasonso explained that corruption costs Zambian people a lot, because the money that could have been used to buy medicines in the school, provide for schools, employ more nurses, employ more doctors, goes to corruption, which is an opportunity cost. And also in the supply chain, also there are middlemen. So, transporters, and not only that, the costs were inflated. So instead of that subsidy benefiting Zambians, it was just benefiting few corrupt politicians. And then also Kasonso explained the cost of corruption. Obviously, because of corruption, a lot of investors won't come into Zambia.
Yeah.
Because it's a cost. Corruption is a cost. They have to bribe, and yeah. So it's And then the other thing, Kasonso, I wanted to mention about subsidies. When you look at these two sectors, electricity, energy sector, and fuel sector, also removing subsidies, meaning now fuel and electricity will be selling at the price that is supposed to be sold. That might encourage investors to come into, it's an incentive for investors to come into that sector, because, Kasonso, you know that an investor invests money into a business to make a profit.
Yes.
Yeah, and then why should they invest in the energy sector which is highly subsidized, and they won't come and make a profit? Because with ZESCO it's different, because that subsidy, ZESCO is a national company. What about the private sector? A private person who will be selling the same price as ZESCO, the same price as Indeni. Yes. So what if an investor wants to come and put a refinery in Zambia? So that investor will be losing, because he will be selling that fuel at a low price, and then you won't be making profit, just like electricity. So that removal of the subsidies actually is an incentive for investors to come into Zambia and invest. And then, Kasonso, you also mentioned that the money that was supposed to be used for the subsidies can be used to invest in other infrastructure. Then the government can have enough money, because Kasonso, whether you like it or not, the biggest spender in every economy worldwide is the government.
The government, yes.
Yeah, and now, if the government doesn't have money to pump into the economy, then the economy is finished.
Yes, it's done.
Yeah, so what the government is saying, instead of us spending $67 million in subsidies, and not only that, Kasonso, if you look at the subsidies, seriously, it's the mines that are enjoying those subsidies. They are buying electricity at a cheaper price.
Yeah.
And fuel at a cheaper price. They are the ones who consume most of that. So, in essence, it's not the Zambians who are enjoying those subsidies. It's the mines. So now, if the government sells the fuel, electricity to the mines at the right price, then there will be more money coming into the coffers in terms of sales tax or duty or VAT. Yeah. So at the end of the day, Kasonso, those subsidies were not benefiting Zambians. It's the mines, and also the corrupt middlemen, the corrupt transporters, and as you've heard, most of those were PF members, ministers. They click. And then the other thing, Kasonso, I wanted to talk about is in economics, they say the duty of the government, every government, is to create full employment. So which means in an economy, everybody needs to be employed. But in essence, it's not the duty of the government to create jobs directly. It's the duty of the government the government creates jobs indirectly. And how do they do that? By creating an environment conducive for you, Kasonso, myself, the private sector, to create jobs. How do they do that? Provide incentives, cheaper loans, low inflation, low interest rates, good road infrastructure, cheap loans, and then also pump money into the economy. So by spending money on those subsidies, then the government won't have money to pump into the economy to pay the suppliers. That's how the government pumps money into the economy. How are they going to pay the suppliers? Now, so the government is going to have 67 million to pay every month to pay suppliers and to do other things. You know, so
Patrick.
Yeah, let me just finish this one. If you look at the rich economies, they do provide, they do have subsidies in a lot of things. Like in the UK, there are subsidies in the agriculture sector. They subsidize a lot of things, milk and other things. And not only that, Kasonso, because they understand that the role of the government is to create jobs. What do? Those people are not employed. They give them money every month because they cannot find jobs, and they understand that it's the duty of the government indirectly to create jobs. Thank you.
Okay. At the moment, the thing is, in the next few minutes, I'll be bringing in whoever is on the background. But before I bring the people from the background, Dr. Kasonso.
Yes.
You know, in terms of the public, the accounts public committee, yeah, with the bit you listened to, or whatever you managed to grab your hands on, what is, don't you think that there should be a policy of how to do things, whereby if somebody does something wrong, should be dealt with? And my question is, what are the implications of having a deal like that?
Yes. Yeah, first of all, let me thank you for that robust discussion on the necessity of subsidies, the kind of subsidies we can have, and those kind of subsidies that we cannot do if we determine that the long-term benefits are not there or restricts government's capacity to invest in other areas. Well, Mr. Chairman, the implications of a single source deal like that is that, first of all, anything that government paid for that was not at a competitive price. And if it wasn't at a competitive price, then there was direct robbery. That's why we are connecting this to corruption. There was direct robbery of the coffers, the government coffers, to be invested in such an venture. So there must at all times be a systematic internal control system where the principles that the government has espoused are being implemented. Is the quality correct? Is the price the right one? And is the delivery going to be on time? So those things must be explored. If you single source those elements, then it's not an open bid. And if it's not an open bid, you have to factor into that project or product or service the fact that there was some elements of corruption and people were trying to benefit themselves at the expense of the system. That is the problem. That is the implication. It is direct robbery from the treasury, but it is also costing a product that is probably above its margin and something like that. So that's why you go to South Africa, you find the product is much cheaper there. And when you come to buy the same product in Zambia, it's more expensive. What is the difference between those? Oh, yes, you can say tariffs and all of that. Yeah, you can say much other things. But most of that is just a little bit of corruption, because the product that costs at a certain price in South Africa has got no reason to be twice expensive in Zambia. Yeah, and even a road that is built in Botswana at half the price doesn't have a reason why it must be built at twice the price in the Republic of Zambia. The difference always is an element of corruption. That is what we would say about that. Yeah. And when we talk about the fight against corruption, Mr. Chairman, the fight against corruption should not be reduced to the little bribe you give a policeman to pass at a roadblock. The real price, where the real price is for the fight against corruption, is in government contracts. Because as Chilufya affirmed, government is the biggest consumer and is the biggest spender in the economy. So if the biggest spender's money goes to fund corrupt contracts, then you are not going anywhere as a country.
Thank you very much for that. Before I go to Patrick, I'll talk to my sister Himba and hear her opinion from, because me and Himba, we are all from Group F, so we do help each other. So for Group F, Himba, are you there, my sister?
She appears to be muted.
You are mute if you are there. Okay, then what I'll do is I'll just go to the other Group F. Pandwa Group F to Afula. Tualeta kwa Gladys. But we will her opinion of what we've been discussing here. Yeah?
Yes, thank you, Percy. Good evening, and good evening, Kasonso. Lovely to see you together with Chilufya. You're looking good, by the way.
Thank you too.
Yes. Just like my brother Percy said that if we were Group F, I think this is just the right time when you just came to tell us about what is this so-called animal subsidies. I actually quite followed when they were doing an interrogation concerning concerning this thievery in corruption, where there was an amount of 16 million when it ended up to somewhere around 80 million, and there was a lot of people involved, like the Ministry of Agriculture. And then there's the single sourcing. So my worry or my problem is, if they have to do the single sourcing, isn't there some kind of a procedure where they have to collect some kind of quotation from different bidders? And obviously, when it comes to bidding, it's not also about it's not about just the quantity, it's also about the quality. But if we look at, if they could say that the quality between, if we make 16 million and 80 million, there's just quite a huge amount of money involved. Is there, maybe you are the right person or you are the wrong person to ask, is there some kind of a public document where those bidders could go and see what are the procedures they could follow to do the bidding, instead of having a single source? Because that looks like just a clear thievery, that somebody knows who are then they're going to appoint to give that what is it called, to award that contract to supply whatever they're going to supply. Kasonso, would you enlighten me as a Group F? Would you enlighten me? Is there some kind of a procedure which they follow, or is it just a pure
Yeah, thank you so much, Sister Gladys, for that very bright question. I am shaking here to try and find an answer somewhere in my large head. What it is, I believe, there are certain aspects or contracts that you can single source. For example, if you are getting foreign funding, and you are expected to have a certain capacity before you can obtain those funds. And then you bring along another institution to give you that capacity so that you together with that institution form the capacity to qualify for that funding. So then if that is the case, you would be said to have single sourced on merit because the other party that came onto there also contributed to your ability to get the funding. So those are partners. But in the case where there are tender board procedures, Zambia has got those procedures that are there wide open and available. What we have is a situation where people in government were deliberately floating those rules and not following them, those procedures and not following them. So they were governing with personal financial interests and not the national interest, because the national interest means we should follow the laid down procedures to which we have sworn that we are going to follow those procedures. So what happened in that case that we're discussing about is that it's just people not following the rules that are laid down by themselves or to the documents that they even have in their offices. So it was a case of just venturing into thieving. We had this terrible culture in government that finances or resources obtained from a corrupt venture are fair game, and that is the mindset that we need to deal with in this dispensation. I hope that helps a little bit.
It helps a little bit, but my concern, if there's just so many people which are concerned, shouldn't there be kind of some consequences in language, even if it was from the office orderly, starting from the person who released those finances? Of course, it ends up to the person that is the finance, the finance minister or whoever signs the last check. Shouldn't be some kind of consequence to follow the trail, who has been signing what and who has been producing the documents? Should it be just swept under the carpet to say it's done, we move forward? And who's going to suffer in this case? Obviously, it's the Zambian people.
This is Zambian people. Yeah, there should be consequences, and the consequences are actually spelled out at law. Actually, in the fight against corruption, is to bring those people to book who didn't follow the rules for things that they were supposed to do. And when the consequences come, I heard a phrase when I was growing up that what is expected doesn't get done, but what is inspected is what gets done. So it means we have to constantly check on these people, and people have to be checked. There has to be a control system and a mechanism to mete out the consequences for floating public tender rules. I think you're right to expect that. We expect that from the new government.
Thank you, Kasonso, and thank you for our Group F. First, let's try our Group F footing. My sister Himba, are you there? Oh, okay, because I was running out of time, my sister. So, what's your opinion, if you've got one, or if you've got a question? We've got our expert, Dr. Kasonso, you can ask, then he can expand and factorize. You are mute, my sister.
As we are Group Q. Kasonso, good evening.
Thank you, Rahimba. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas, brother Patrick. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Rahimba. Merry Christmas, Gladys. Mweva Group D.
How to alifuma ku Group D? Kainge na Mozambique, so to ala ku Q. Kasonso na Patrick ifwe bakiumwalishwa one by one nelo chisungu mlela ndama temu tenda awarding ifwe tafwe abakwefe abakuleft so mtwewe kona ifwe mchitundu esho tumfwa ekwati mtu wasera kupano no right fimulela ndapa matenda in your short term twebe niko ekwati uwa bakwatine umona emu as w ngamwambikila question inena ala ilembulula padapene mwachibika mwaipusha question nena tambo kulembulula question kange nishansa shikwete so ndondolele niko pakusenda tenda inenewa ku group Z what am I supposed to do if I want therefore kusenda kutenda mu government finshi mfilo kumonapo ikwati benjibirawo bengonga onisangwa mukanshila ka corruption.
Before
Tabala ask Vakasoso, Narami Pela, this time you have to give it 2 minutes. Then I'll let Patrick to answer for 2 minutes. Then I'll expect you to do a summary. Then Nishtwalalanda good night. So 2 minutes here, Vakasoso answer now. Then I'll give it to Patrick for 2 minutes. Then back to you to summarize. Then I'll close the show.
Thank you, sir. Ichikankale cha kulole shapo kumono buteko nga onabukwata ifyo bulefwaya. Government will usually publish openly ifyo bulefwaya kwa bakucha supply. Mwamfama ngwingwi okukabe fimwa ichibira ko cyarimu mwaipekanya afina mu kuipekanya nangu ya mwamona bati advertise publicly babuteko because ubuteko one of the things you have to expect is transparency, otherwise nishturebo ekera fikya bukuba fyare chikakale so ngabachita advertise babuteko eri mwabika mu bid yenu ne number shenu no mutengo wena ka profit mukachita collect and then mwachita na track mwapoka na receipt mwachita na track bid number yenu. More let's check on the progress if you have been selected to supply or you've been given part of the contract to supply and things like that. So you have to be willing to play in the open space. That is number one. If you want to avoid single source, if you have to take it kumbali, mfwana fi mumbali na yapapene ati kukabe fie aka nono aka kwakanya kumbali mukampere kwaka elo then nkachita push bid my offices. That is what you have to avoid to stay out of trouble. Yeah. If you are bidding for government work, it is going to be open and transparent, and then you apply openly. You cost your work, and then you be part of the list. And then the list has a criteria which they are going to use to determine who wins. And that's a fair game. That is how we're going to do business in the new dispensation, I believe. Patrick.
Yeah, thank you, Kasonso. But Gladys, I think Kasonso has explained, has answered most of your question, but just to add a bit to that. But Gladys, there is a tender procedure with government. But Gladys, what shocks us is Zambia has got processes, procedures, controls, just like in the Western world. And we've got enforcement agents, we've got the legal system, even our democracy is so powerful. And there are tender processes, there are tender procedures, they have to advertise the tenders, and we've got even a national tender board. So, which means these things are supposed to be done according to the procedures, the processes, the tender procedures and processes. But corruption, my sister, but Gladys, there was so much corruption in the last government that they found ways of circumventing our processes, like the single sources, like emergency tenders, just to avoid, the procedure. So going forward, and HH has been talking about this, I think we expect tenders to be the usual procedure is the tender needs to be advertised. Times of Zambia, Daily Mail, whatever they advertise them, and people apply for those tenders. And the procedures have to, and the process has to be fair, you know, not to, you know, not disadvantage anybody. But we have, you know, but we've got now new permanent secretaries. I think they need to be on their toes, because the permanent secretaries are the controlling officers. They are the CEOs. And in every organization, if there's corruption in the company, it boils down to the top, who is the CEO. So they need to be on their boards, making sure that processes are followed. There is no corruption. We don't want to see things like emergency tenders, single sourcing, because single sourcing, as Kasonso said, is just one way of doing corruption. Because you're only using one, unless there is a need, like what Kasonso mentioned, that you've got a strategic partner, and then you go into that, that deal, and that strategic partner is a supplier. Then there is no problem. But most single sourcing is the root of corruption. Emergency tenders. Why are you issuing an emergency tender now? What were you doing? So that's just one way of circumventing the process, because if there's an emergency tender, then there's no procedure to follow. So going forward, I believe, just like Kasonso said, such kind of corruption, which is a cost, not only to the government, but to the Zambian people. It's an opportunity cost, in the sense that the money that is supposed to use to buy medication, to sponsor students, to provide, to sponsor students at universities, to build the roads and to do other things, create more jobs, goes to only a few people. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.
In
Since
summary,
we've run out of time. I wanted to ask him if she's got a follow-up question, because Gladys had a follow-up question. So just for the sake of being fair, do you have a follow-up question?
Percy, thank you so much. I really don't have a follow-up question, but I would love to communicate. Kuli abanandi wa group D. Atinga mwasango muntu mleshta bid for tender. Alera ndativika ko kampereko ka 6% ka 10% kukana kumukanina. Ero nga mwachenjera nga mlefu ya mwasumina ati njafwako. Ero lya tenda ya akupera ero waya muripota. Kange wena ukwataka ina shingira muitumba. Wayanda nifya njewe nifya endere. But honestly, tuila asumina. Let us not agree muntu akwati na lako afwako na la station na ukampeleko 10%. Efya batemu aba mu government. Oh, business proposal lembaka tender na la pushing la, then I should get 10% of what they're going to give you. So na papata ba group Z tuila esha no kwesha. We are all Zambians. We have the right to benefit to the national cake, whether tutkwansho kulande chisungu, we know whether tulalande chisungu, whether tualisambilila, we are equal before the law, and HH want every Zambian to benefit. Merry Christmas.
Okay, now
Kasonso nana lapela ka summary muchiremba ili ashirelo twatsalanda pabukwebo mchalo chesu cha Zambia. Icho tuwachibalirapo nefivela itata ama subsidies pamafuta. Ama subsidies pamafuta fipendo fyandalama efikalamba efyo obuteko bulipilla bali abale leta amafuta kuchalo. Nomba ili obuteko bwaleko kubika mushirendalama kamutengo kamafuta kaya pamulo. Akamutengo kamafuta nga kaya pamulo ili ngirine aba affected nibo wanse kumayanda kumayanda kama mitengo ya afya kulya ila kupantanshi imitengo ya transportation ya kwerelako ero ya afya mwamuna fenefint mu economy imitengo ya kosa nombe ili ngirine obuteko liranga bulefunya kala kapieta lirebika mune imitengo ya kosa ila kwata ma interventions ubuteko bwenu nabubika kwa ma interventions indalama for most people bana bali ya kuma grade school takuli kulipila So ishendalama shakupenda tibasikufaindi bashani uko takuli bani intervention na interventions na yambi ni akwaka liubu chaka nono baletere kuma constituencies zeka kwati mwatu alama programs in ma project mwapango tuma company mwambokola ingisha machita mwebeni mule yafwa so that abantu bakwata pa kumokubo ichikankale cho buteko bushinga bikira mo ulupia chakwe bati ubuteko bulefu kukwata ko indalama shafulako kuleba ko kulipira enkongole ero kuleba ko nokusakamana tionse efyaba muchalo chimbi nga chakwe batikalaka lupia ba uteko baka patikisho kola akabika mulya muma subsidies mukola akabika fe mumafuta nishi twakola twalira na corruption iyaba muri fuel chain supply chain na corruption iyaba mona balabe nabali endalama banono ebakalali afe endalama beka endalama chakala kubekala chalo ero na chimbi tuleta skwanda opportunity yakoba tulelipira kwenkongole shatukwete na chimbi chakwe bati ukutwalilila pamonga ukula chimuno kula shitovunga pankongole lyonse lo muleri yafye panganda so elama subsidies bafunyishe ko nango finfya mune kwa fyako so mtengo ubuteko nabubika ma interventions ayengi so konkane no buteko na tubombeshe pantu ubunangani tabulisha kasuma mucha kulekeresha twalanda pa mafisakanwa na ene mafisakanwa na tuyasango kwebati yalalenga makwebo yakosa abalirira mu bali fyaba nono yalalenga malofa yafula nangu nindala mashabuteko shira muneke fipendo fingi but abalesanga mu bukumu bali fyaba nono so elo fila chefi yako nindala mu buteko yabukwate ndala ma corruption ila chita distort mitengo yafya kulya mitengo mumonena ngo nifiwo papampu twali mfokwe bati no mutengo wa corruption mulire ine namba emo yaba so nga twafunyamo filya fyonse ni shikuti buteko bwa kwatendala manapa kumo kubuko kwa furisha rekala cyane mukwaye bakese na kabiri pamande tukabwesha po tukaleteri ya shinilimbi lero twapwisha pali fuel subsidies na mafisakanwa mu makwebo Sharon Ponkwai, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from me.
All right. Before I close the program, Gladys, we've got a minute because you wanted to say something.
And ala supawira fi I've got a minute. Yeah, thank you. Nipa mafisa kanwa. Apopa mafisa kamna mulela ndapo ba Dr. Kasonso. Balabonsa ba sendenda lama shidesha mafisa kanwa. Busho buteko tabulelo leke shapwati. Yali inshidenda lama babi kamuna nikane mu malangeti esho bafisa ushobuteko tabulelo le shapwati na kalimo kuti bachinja kwenda lama for example bachinja kwa 100 kwacha na 50 kwacha pakweba ati twaikata bali aba kwata shonse amafisa kanwa epo mpelele. I wish I could continue. Thank you.
All right,
but Percy, I think your point, we've been talking about what Gladys is saying, and I think Kasonso, let's have another program to talk about the change of currency, because in the Meshingi Shawa Mubantu, and the best example is Faith Musonda. And you know that banks don't have money, not even Bank of Zambia. In the Mashata Pinokufuma, just before my elections. So so the fact that there is no cash in circulation, usually what the government does is print more money, and it costs money. So why should they?
What I would do, Patrick.
Why should they print more money now? Instead of printing the money, but change a bit my features yandalama, starting with say 150 kwacha, and then once they've done that, I can tell you, Kasonso, the criminals will panic because they have to launder that money now. They've got. Thank you, Bapes.
Okay, no, on that, because that was one of the topics we want to cover next week. So on Monday next week, I'll bring you a bit earlier, like I did today. It will work the same way. So I hope then you'd have, when I give you your segment to speak, you'd have prepared yourself to educate the masses. This has been a nice Wakwetu program. This is Percy Chairman, the Dr. Kasonso and the Wakwetu crew. And this is our good nights. Greetings to Chivolia and Kabwata Estates. Those are my places, so I have to greet them anyway. So have a good night, people, and hope you enjoyed our program. Thank you.